We keep hearing that we need billions to protect our ecosystems. And honestly, you might assume the main problem is simply finding the money. But the truth? It's far more complicated and actually pretty fascinating. Today in this explainer, we are diving straight into a massive, systemic knot in the world of nature finance. We're going to completely demystify the bureaucratic gridlock that is actively holding back climate capital. It's a phenomenon known as the reconciliation burden, and it fundamentally shapes how environmental action happens, or more often than not doesn't happen, on the ground.
To really grasp what this means, let's anchor these abstract financial concepts to the real world for a second. Picture a single physical hectare of mangrove forest sitting on the Indonesian coast. Imagine the developers behind this specific hectare are applying for a grant, let's say under a call for proposals closing in October 2026. What exactly does this one piece of land have to prove just to get the funding it needs? It's not just about planting trees, right? The hurdles are absolutely monumental.
Get a load of this checklist. To even qualify, the project must arrive with documented feasibility work and established expert consortiums. They have to prove free, prior, and informed consent. They must hit global conservation criteria from bodies like the IUCN and CBD, plus show a pathway to carbon credits aligned with the ICVCM. A validation body has to certify everything at every single cycle. And to top it all off, they must aim for Article 6 host government authorization. This brilliantly illustrates the crushing reconciliation burden placed on developers. Every single one of these requirements is totally reasonable on its own, but stack them all together, they are a massive mountain.
So, here is the crucial takeaway. Capital arrives in disconnected pieces, and that's really the core mystery we're unpacking today. Why is the money ready to flow, but the rules governing that money simply aren't talking to each other? Well, the rules were written by totally different institutions for totally different purposes on completely different timetables. Nobody wrote their rulebook while looking at the other guy's rulebook. And the burden of making them all work together, that falls 100% on the project developer.
So, to untangle this systemic knot today, we'll first look at these disconnected rule writers. Then, we'll uncover the true cost of delay, examine some real-world regulatory roadblocks, and finally, figure out how to actually navigate this bureaucratic maze.
Let's jump into our first section, the disconnected rule writers, and uncover the systemic flaw that's causing all this friction.
We really need to define what we call the codification layer. This layer didn't just run ahead of the capital deployment, it literally produced the very shape in which climate capital now arrives. Because rules governing capital are written by different bodies on different schedules, literally none of them are designed to compose with the next. Imagine trying to build a house, right? But your electrician, your plumber, and your framer all have completely different blueprints and outright refuse to speak to one another. That is the exact reality for nature finance developers today.
What's super interesting here is seeing where the rules actually do work together versus where they hit a total brick wall. Inside a specific family of rules, composition works beautifully. For example, corporate disclosure standards, like the ISSB conditionally adopting TNFD nature metrics, or in the taxonomy family, the Common Ground taxonomy successfully mapping regional rules against each other. But look at the outside boundaries. When European corporate disclosures revised their standards in July 2026 to save on administrative costs, they just deferred biodiversity data points. They completely missed the chance to link corporate disclosure with the conservation regimes on the ground. Composition basically stops dead at the family boundary. And because public global standards aren't connecting these dots, private funders are basically forced to build their own bridges. Take the Blue Action Fund, for instance. It's a nonprofit foundation funded by European governments holding a €199.3 million portfolio. For their October 2026 call in Asia, they are requiring projects to have at least 1,000 hectares of mangrove and a credible pathway to carbon credits. They are privately writing their own composition rules to force biodiversity and carbon to work together. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. A funder can require you to aim for host government authorization, sure, but they absolutely cannot legally force a sovereign country to grant it. They are writing rules they literally cannot enforce.
Moving on to Section 2, the true cost of delay. Let's look at the hidden currencies developers are actually forced to pay.
If you ask someone what this reconciliation actually costs, the industry usually points to the direct invoices, like the ones you see on the left, things like Vera's 23-cent issuance levy or a $5,000 upfront verification review. The numbers that show up in the public ledger. But the true cost, it's those hidden risks on the right, the schedule delays, the expiring options, political gates closing, and the ultimate terrifying risk of the project simply never reaching completion at all. These are paid in time and probability. and you won't find them on any standard invoice.
This quote captures the absolute core of the problem. Regimes do not stack additively in money. Regimes stack multiplicatively in risk. I want you to really think about that. Overlapping rules create a chain of gates. If you have 6 different regimes to satisfy, it isn't just 6 times the paperwork. It is a highly fragile chain where if just one single link stalls, say a government registry delays a routine form, everything downstream comes to a complete and total halt. To put that into perspective, let's look at Belize's 2021 Blue Bond transaction. This was a massive, high-profile deal that retired $553 million of sovereign debt through $364 million in new financing. The all-in financing cost was roughly 6.1%. Now that is a lot of money directed to reserves and transaction costs. But the crazy twist here is that the money wasn't actually the bottleneck. The entire structure hinged on one sovereign gate: the passage of a Blue Bonds Loan Act and Marine Spatial Planning. The fees paid for the assembly, sure, but the government's legislative gates set the actual shape, schedule, and reality of the deal.
Let's dive into Section 3, Real-World Regulatory Roadblocks, to make this bureaucracy a bit more tangible.
Just look at this timeline of Zimbabwe's carbon rules. Talk about regulatory whiplash. In May 2023, the government declared all existing carbon agreements totally void. Then, just 3 months later in August, they revised it to let developers retain 70% of proceeds. Fast forward to May 2025, that entire previous framework is completely repealed and a brand new registry is established. That is 3 different sets of foundational rules in 3 years, with each one being legally binding at the time. Seriously, how on earth can a project developer build a robust 5-year financial model when the laws change underneath them every few months? The short answer is, they can't.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact on conservation. The Wildlife Conservation Society had a Blue Action grant operating across Kenya, Madagascar, and Tanzania. By the time it closed in January 2024, they had absolutely crushed their human beneficiary target, hitting 438% and engaging over 21,000 people. But look at the legal protected area target, exactly 0%. Why? Simply because the enabling legal gazettement decree in Madagascar was left pending. Election cycles, pandemic disruptions, leadership changes, they all slowed the file down. The community engagement, which the developer could actually control, wildly overperformed. But the legal designation, which only the government controlled, it didn't arrive in 5 years.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this: money can shorten a gate, but money cannot open a gate a sovereign holds shut. Now, readiness funding definitely helps. For instance, in May 2026, Singapore committed $15 million to the Global Green Growth Institute, with $5 million of that specifically for an Article 6 readiness facility to help host countries build institutional capacity. Money greases the wheels for sure, but ultimately, if a national legislature doesn't want to pass a law or a specific ministry just won't sign a decree, literally all the capital in the world won't force that gate open.
Which brings us to our final section, navigating the bureaucratic maze. Let's get into some strategic, actionable takeaways. If this reconciliation burden is truly paid in scheduled delays and government dependencies, project developers have to adapt how they prepare. So, here are 3 critical steps. First, identify the load-bearing regimes early. Way before project design even begins. Second, sequence your entire schedule around the gates held by governments first. Think about it. You can rush your own internal paperwork. You cannot rush a rights-based community consent process, and you absolutely cannot rush a government registry. You need to start those on day 1. And third, put the composition question directly to the funder before signing anything. If they require you to hit both carbon and biodiversity targets, ask them point-blank exactly how they expect those frameworks to legally interact.
I want to leave you all with this final provocative thought. Unless global standard setters like the CBD or the ISSB finally step up and create an upstream bridge that forces these rule families to align, the reality remains pretty stark. Until a bridge is produced, the burden is billed project by project, by the applicants least equipped to build one, and paid for in a currency nobody is counting. Really think about that. We are essentially asking the people on the ground, the ones actually out there planting the mangroves and protecting the biodiversity, to somehow solve a massive geopolitical accounting failure. So what will the true cost to our planet be if we don't fix this broken layer of climate capital? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those hard questions, and I'll see you next time.